Two fake HOA cops broke into his garage, trashing his stuff and threatening him over unauthorized repairs. When one of them grabbed a crowbar and moved toward his late father's motorcycle, his hand slid toward the lit flamethrower on the workbench. What happened next would shock even the toughest cops. But let's start from the beginning. It all started on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was in my garage, tuning up my motorcycle, the scent of motor oil hanging heavy in the air. My hands were deep in the engine when I heard a sharp, aggressive knock at the door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor. This was hard and deliberate. It made my skin crawl. "Open up! HOA inspection!" A deep, commanding voice barked from the other side. HOA! That didn't make sense. We didn't even have a homeowners association in this neighborhood. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. I wiped my hands on a rag, walked to the door, and cracked it open. Two men stood there. They wore cheap tactical vests over black shirts, sunglasses masking their eyes, giving off an unsettling vibe of authority. The taller one had a buzz cut and a hard jawline, his mouth set in a permanent scowl. His partner, shorter and bulkier, had a snake tattoo curling out from under his sleeve and arms crossed over his chest like he was sizing me up. "We received reports of unauthorized construction on this property," the taller one said, his tone sharp and practiced, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. I frowned. "Sorry, but you've got the wrong house." I started to close the door, but the tall guy shoved his foot into the gap. "You got a permit for that bike repair?" His voice darkened, and the space between us suddenly felt a lot smaller. That's when the alarm bells started screaming in my head. No one from the city or even a real HOA would act like this. My pulse quickened. "Look, I don't know what you think is going on here." The taller one pushed hard against the door, and before I could react, both men forced their way inside. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my tool cart as they moved past me, spreading out like they owned the place. "Hey!" I shouted. "You can't do that!" The shorter one smirked. "HOA jurisdiction," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "We have the right to inspect any property for unauthorized modifications." Bullshit. But they were already helping themselves to my stuff, rifling through my tool cabinet and storage bins. Metal clinked and rattled as they dug through my things like it was a garage sale. The short one picked up a socket wrench, testing the weight in his hand like he was thinking about using it. "Don't touch that," I snapped, stepping toward him. "Or what?" The short one grinned wider, his eyes cold and dead behind his sunglasses. My fists curled at my sides, adrenaline flooding my veins. The taller one reached toward my vintage tool set, a gift from my father. And that's when I saw it. In the corner, half hidden behind a stack of boxes, sat my flamethrower. It was already lit. A thin, deadly flame flickered at the tip of the nozzle, a faint hum of pressurized gas filling the air. My eyes narrowed, my breathing steadied, and for the first time that afternoon, I smiled. "Get the hell out of my garage," I shouted, my voice cutting through the heavy tension like a knife. But they didn't even flinch. The tall one laughed, a cold, deliberate sound that made my skin crawl. "Non-compliance will result in a fine," he said, his eyes narrowing behind his sunglasses. He was enjoying this. "Yeah," the short one sneered, shifting his grip on the crowbar. "Or a little damage." He tapped the metal bar against the side of my motorcycle, my father's motorcycle. A hollow, metallic clang echoed through the garage. My blood turned to ice. My fists curled so tight my knuckles ached. My chest tightened. "You touch that, and I swear—" "What?" The short one's grin widened, teeth flashing under the dim garage light. "You'll call the cops." He stepped closer, eyes glinting. "We are the cops." I knew it was a bluff. Real cops wouldn't act like this, wouldn't get this comfortable destroying someone's property. But it didn't matter. They had already crossed the line. The short one's hand darted toward my workbench, fingers closing around a socket wrench. He whipped it across the garage. It clattered against the concrete floor, skidding just inches from my bike's tire. My stomach twisted. That bike wasn't just a machine. It was the last thing I had left from my father. I saw red. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breathing sharpened, shallow and fast. My muscles coiled, my body shifting without thinking. "You've got 3 seconds to get out," I growled, my voice low and sharp. The tall one stepped toward me, slow and deliberate. "And what if we don't?" His smile was cold, predatory. I didn't answer. My hand slid toward the workbench, fingers curling around the smooth metal handle resting there. My pulse steadied, my breathing slowed. "Don't do anything stupid, buddy," the tall one warned, his tone dipping toward menace. "Yeah," the short one smirked. He tapped the crowbar against his palm. "Wouldn't want this place to..." Click. The sound was subtle, but it cut through the tension like a gunshot. The flamethrower's ignition switch hummed to life. A thin line of fire flicked into existence at the nozzle, bright and steady. Both men froze. The tall one's smile vanished. The short one's eyes widened, his grip on the crowbar tightening. The flame crackled softly, casting a flickering glow across the concrete walls. The air thickened with the scent of burning gas. My hand tightened around the handle. My eyes never left them. "Try me," I said quietly. The taller guy's hand went toward his waistband. I saw the glint of a handgun. Big mistake. With a quick motion, I adjusted the nozzle and squeezed the trigger. A burst of heat shot out, a thin sheet of flame licking toward the ground between us. "Shit!" The short one yelped, stumbling backward. His buddy's hand froze before he could draw his weapon. "Step away from my tools," I said coldly. The flamethrower hissed softly in my hands. "You're crazy," the short one screamed. "Yeah," I agreed, "but you're the ones who broke into my garage." The tall one's hand twitched toward his weapon again. "Try it," I whispered. He hesitated, and then the short one lost his nerve. "Let's get out of here, man." "You're making a mistake," the tall one snarled as he backed toward the door. I raised the flamethrower slightly. "Try me." They bolted. The second they hit the driveway, I was on the phone with the police. Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up. The real cops arrived just in time to catch the 2 guys fumbling with their car keys. Turns out, they weren't just fake HOA officers, they were serial burglars. They'd been pulling the same scam all across the county, preying on quiet neighborhoods and posing as HOA enforcers to get into homes and garages. The cops slapped the cuffs on them, and as they hauled the 2 men toward the squad cars, the shorter one turned and shot me a death glare. "You'll regret this," he growled. "Yeah?" I smiled. "I'll take my chances." The taller one glared at me, too. "You're lucky you didn't set yourself on fire." I smiled wider. Oh, I wasn't aiming at me. One of the officers gave me a knowing look. "You had a flamethrower ready to go?" I shrugged. What can I say? I'm a fan of preparedness. As the squad cars pulled away, I stepped back into my garage, feeling the weight of my flamethrower in my hands, and for the first time that day, I smiled.